wrapping up February, I beat a game called Deadlink. Um, it's a game that was in early access for a while. It might still be. I thought that they recently just had their 1.0 release, and I think that's why I picked it up. It's a roguelite first-person shooter. You've probably seen several of them if you're kind of watching Steam or Steam demos. Um, there's several. Deadlink happens to be one of the more popular ones, I believe. And it was a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed playing through it. I considered beating it as just finishing the roguelite, like, beating the final boss at the regular difficulty. I think there was sort of like extra difficulties that you could do. But by the time I beat that boss the first time, I think I put like 6-7 hours in, and I was like, I have enjoyed this, and this feels like a good stopping point. I've gotten my money's worth. I feel happy with what's happened, and I can kind of move on at this point. And so there was a lot more gameplay to play. I didn't play it, but I did get sort of that full beat the run experience that I really liked. And I think it's important to note that roguelikes, I don't always love. I love progression. And so that's why I will always skew towards a roguelite, because it has that sort of overarching progression between runs. And I think the whole industry is sort of skewing that way too. But the whole, I spent 40 minutes or something and I lost all my progress, that is not fun for me. It's not fun for anyone, but particularly I am very likely to just put the game down if I lose too much progress. And so fortunately, I was able to play Deadlink and have fun with it. And there's some really interesting things. I think what's also a trend that you might notice with the games that I play and the games that I really enjoy are character builds and build variety. I love, I'm not great at it, but I do love the feeling of sort of optimizing or finding something that really works. And in theory, roguelites of the 2020s, early 2020s, right? 2023, 2024, a bit earlier than that, post Hades roguelites all tend to have that sort of feel to them. And so Deadlink was like that, and I had a blast playing it. And so what was really cool to me were the character builds. Like I said, I think first of all, it's worth noting, I think the art style is really interesting. It's a cyberpunk world with this sort of stylized art style that really works for them. I think it's got really beautiful lighting, and the enemies and characters all feel really placed within the world, and they're easy to differentiate, which is hugely important for this kind of game. It was really easy to kind of see an enemy, identify it, and sort of take it out in that Doom 2016, Doom Eternal ethos of combat design, where you enter into an arena and sort of enemies spawn in until you defeat all of them. But those enemies are spawning in a very certain order that sort of ramps up and ramps down in intensity, and each of the enemies kind of pair with each other or build on top of each other, where you have several grunts and then a big guy. And it's important as a player to be able to identify each one and then assess their threat levels kind of internally and make important decisions on who you need to be killing first. And I think Deadlink really succeeds in that in a way that's not always easy to find. It's hard to pull off that sort of Doom Eternal combat chess ethos. I think Ultra Kill also did a really good job of pulling that off. But Deadlink did it too. And I think that is really impressive. I think I was always able to get into that flow of fighting enemies and always being like, oh, this is the next threat that I need to take out. And that is a testament to how well done the enemies' silhouettes, colors, and designs are, is that I was always able to see an enemy out of the corner of my eye and be able to identify it. And that's extremely important for this style of game and combat. But on top of that, there's also the whole character builds, right? This is the general, it adopts the general style of roguelites that we see all the time right now. You beat the stage and then you get a choice between 3 random upgrades, and you can only choose one, and then you sort of do that until you end. And so it uses this tried and true formula, which works for them. And what I really liked is that each of the abilities, the sort of unlocks that you get, are generic such that you can slot them into several different slots, and the slots are broken into passive and active slots, where the passive ones will just give you a passive bonus, and then the active ones have some sort of trigger action that'll then trigger the item's effects. And so what I really liked about that is that the triggers themselves were interesting, because they used sort of the regular first-person shooter like actions that you have access to, and instead of like creating new quirky ones. And so one of them, my favorite one, was the action was kind of bound to when you swap weapons. So your character has 2 weapons, and you can swap between them using either like a hotkey or the scroll wheel. And so that swap is what would trigger one of the actions. And so for me, what I loved is I could build my characters around essentially firing one shot from each weapon, like a single shot and then swap, which would trigger an action, single shot and then swap and then trigger an action. And that allowed me to create some really interesting builds. And I loved that as a system, because the builds were based on top of the actions that the player would already be doing, but also because of that, the actions the player were doing were directly decided by the build you had. And so they were very tightly knit. Even if some of the actions could have been more creative, the difference between like corrosive damage versus fire damage versus shock damage is very inconsequential, at least in this sort of base difficulty. I'm sure it ramps up to much more difficult stuff later on. I think I found that like corrosive damage was good enough for me, and I sort of just defaulted to that and didn't worry about it too much. But I really liked that. I think it was cool that how tightly knit those mechanics were, because if you think about how in say Vampire Survivors, where it's the same sort of upgrade system, but all the upgrades do is just sort of add to your damage output, and the way that you play the game generally is the same. You're just kind of moving around and dodging enemies while all this stuff around you, all your abilities that you've acquired, are dealing with them. And that's not the case in Deadlink, where the abilities you're getting directly impacts the way you play, and vice versa. The way you play directly impacts the abilities you get. And I think that is a very cool and interesting way of approaching this roguelite issue, and bringing it into that sort of Doom Eternal framework. And I think Deadlink really succeeded in that, on top of having a gorgeous art style that's stylized and unique. I think they're like key art, which has like this dude with a gun that's like really stretched out with these really beautiful colors, is super eye-catching. And I think all their 3D art is exceptional, and I personally really enjoyed their 2D art. All the little UI flourishes were really tasty to me. And so I think it was cool. I enjoyed it a lot, actually. Of course, there's always the downsides of, I don't love roguelites, and would it have been more interesting with sort of a level design progression, like a campaign? Maybe. But I think what they did do was very successful. I'm sure it was also pretty successful monetarily, but design-wise, it was successful in my eyes, and I enjoyed it a lot. And it was a game that succeeded through early access. I believe it's one of the games that actually made it to 1.0, and I think that's commendable. It's very hard to make a game, even harder to release it, and at this point in the early access landscape, even harder to finish it, which maybe finishing it in an early access game is the same as stopping working on a live service game. in kind of today's understanding of early access. But anyways, I think the game's neat. I had a lot of fun with it. It was cool. I only know a few words, but it was cool. You should play it if you liked Doom or Doom Eternal. If you liked Ultra Kill, all of those games kind of subscribe to the same ethos that Doom 2016 put out, and I think Deadlink adheres to that and builds upon it in a way that people who like those will like this one as well. And so if you did, you should check it out. If you didn't, you should still check it out if you like first-person shooters, especially very frenetic ones, like high intensity first-person shooters. Not like a high movement shooters is a genre, I think, that could be attributed to this. So if you like any of those things, you should definitely check it out. If you don't, take a look at it and maybe check it out. I don't know. Games are cool. You can decide what you want to play. Anyways, thanks for listening. See ya.